Hello there. Welcome to the Bad Vibes Club. Long time no hear or long time no talk. I've not heard myself talk to you for a long time. Welcome to another episode. This is the first of a few, and by few I mean 2 episodes where I speak to people about the idea of voice. So I'm speaking to 2 practitioners who do different things about the notion of voice in their work. Next one will be with Emma Bennett, who is a performer and a writer and assistant professor at University College of Dublin in the theatre department. But this one is with Cian Donnelly, who is a performance maker or a performance artist who now lives in Rome, but is originally from the Republic of Ireland, but lived for a long time in Belfast. And I've known Cian for quite a long time, and I've seen a few of his works live, but I've seen lots of his work online. He's quite a prolific producer of work. You should definitely follow him on Instagram to see what he does with music and performance and collage. Loads of great stuff. We spoke about his kind of life experience, how he ended up in Rome, how he ended up doing performance. We spoke about kind of experiences he's had of kind of spiritual abjection that led him to make certain kind of performances that explored darker themes in a quite interesting comic way. We spoke about how his view of the world changed after becoming a father. We spoke about a performance he did at Experimentica back a long time ago, 2013, which we were both at that festival in Cardiff. Then, of course, we spoke about voice, this idea of character and the way that these different characters that Cian invents speak to the audience or sing to the audience. And then we speak about a new venture that Cian's got called Diamond Dog Coaching, which is basically helping artists and other creative practitioners communicate more effectively. Cian obviously has a lot of experience of speaking to audiences. He's an amazing, I suppose the word would be raconteur, but like storyteller, joke teller. Yeah, kind of an amazing presence, as you'll hear in the conversation. And so now he trains other people to emphasize their presence and to say what they want to say and the way they want to say it. Then we chatted about painting. Cian originally started as a painter. I chatted about my theory of the difference between painters who end up doing performance and sculptors who end up doing performance. And then we spoke about Belfast. He thinks Belfast, what does he call it? He calls the conversations you overhear in Belfast music, and I thought that was really beautiful. He's great on the accents, the sense of humour, the way of speaking in different places. Then we kind of speak about, harder to define things in art, how to teach art, how to know that you've made something amazing. He calls those moments heavy magic, these moments when you kind of know that you're getting your ideas across in the way that you want to do them. And again, he relates this back to this Diamond Dog Coaching stuff that he's doing. So you can find out about Cian's work on his website, which is Cian, Cian Donnelly, DONNELLY.com. And you can find out about Diamond Dog Coaching at diamonddogcoaching.com. And yeah, be sure to check out Cian on Instagram. It's Cian Donnelly Art. All right, I'll join you after the conversation. Enjoy. How would you describe your practice at this point, and how would you describe it having developed?
Well, I've been doing it since about 1996, and I trained as a painter. So initially I was making quite pretty Robert Motherwell-esque paintings. They were sort of pretty. I was quite interested in colour and touch and the language of paint. And then I just refined that, I guess, in my degree year. And then I painted for a while in the west of Ireland, lived there for a couple of years. Always abstract, but then became more process-based. And a lot of people, I think, at that time in the late 90s were sort of into Jason Martin and Zebedee Jones and those kind of processed painters. And then I went and did an MA in Barcelona, and I got quite into just making objects, solid objects out of paint. So sculptural painting, I guess. Linda Beglis and some of the LA artists I was quite interested in. And then in the course of that year, things happened in my personal life, and I just sort of lost interest in painting and became much more interested in the power of storytelling and my own life experience and narrative. And when I came back to Belfast, I think I moved to Belfast, there was a period where I spent about 6 months, I think, basically not occasionally going into the studio, but mostly lying in bed, just looking at the wall, because I just felt rotten. I was depressed, I think, and I didn't feel so good. But a lot of stories were coming to life in me, and that gave birth to a project about a guy called Daniel Cullen, who, in an experience of grief, is visited by ghosts, and kind of musical theater starts to um, well, when they sing songs to him, but it's all almost like sort of children's music and a strange, like psychedelic musical theatre. And then I got a fellowship at the British School of Rome, and I set up a choir, the Order of the Golden Ghost. And it all contained that kind of mythology and storytelling, and the drawings were presented as his drawings. And then the narrative just started to weigh down the work, I guess. It just became,
as in it started to weigh down the physical work, the drawings and painting.
No, it became too prescriptive, I think, in relation to the reading of the work. This is about a guy who, but I felt like the narrative became chains in the work. It chained the objects that I was making to a narrative. I made these strange sort of crustacean-like forms that were made out of continual pouring of paint and acrylic medium. So there was still an element of painting and sculpture in it, but they became a series of phantasmagorical entities called blood lizards. And, they had to be read in that way. And after maybe 3 or 4 years, but actually it was longer. I can't remember dates exactly, but maybe it was 6 or 7 years that I had developed that project, from the initial conception, lying in bed staring at the wall, to singing in a choir in the British School of Rome, was probably 6 or 7 years. And then when I came back from Rome, I was like, I just can't do this anymore, because everything I draw has to become part of that narrative. Every object I make has to be. And it was just, I started to go up my own arse, to be honest. And it became, Lord of the Rings-esque, just nonsense. And then my dad got sick and died. And I think that just exploded me again. So I think every time I have an explosion in my life, the work, I find it liberating in terms of art making. And maybe when we first met each other, that was probably a little bit after my dad died, and I was making kind of the work that's on my website now, meaning I put on a mask. I just started performing my own music live and telling my own stories live and focusing more on writing. And I think that was a sort of a grotesque, a spiritual objection. I think it is. There's a lot of, challenging subjects, but there's a spirituality to it too, I think, which is important to me. And how the spiritual and the object coexist in the hallucinatory state of grief. And that is sort of what most of my work was founded on, until I became a daddy. And then after I became a daddy, I think it's become, a little bit more simple. As you know yourself, when you have an hour to make work, you tend to just bish, bash, bosh it out. So I'm a lot more improvisational, playful. I think the weight of it is lighter, and I'm less agitated and disturbed when I'm making work. Sometimes when I was making work as some of the characters that came to me after my dad died, I used to get scared sometimes, actually, looking back at the video, because they were quite disturbing, I think. That was part of the work, but I don't feel like that now. I think it's a lot more playful. So when you sent me a little email earlier on saying that you were laughing at the Shankill E.T. sketch, it was nice, because I don't know how that was going. That's kind of where my head's at now, making not stand-up comedy. And I don't really want to be one of the artists that tries to be a stand-up comedian. I'm not really that interested in that, although moving from a sort of traditional place of performing and citing your work in a gallery or whatever, I would be interested in playing in the kind of clubs that stand-up comedians play, but obviously I'll be doing my own kind of thing. But the fact that it made you laugh is good, because most people don't laugh when I tell jokes in an art context. But it's measured language in some of the other videos, and more to do with sort of abstract, absurd associations, like putting a snail on a loaf of batch loaf bread. Sometimes that just comes from drawings, but I wanted to translate it to just performing and holding the space as a performer. Silence is important. But thank you for saying you laughed.
Well, just for context, it's a video in which It is almost like a sketch. You're playing these different characters, a kind of gruff Belfast character who's at a bar on the Shankill Road, and he's
Yeah.
phoning for a taxi, and the taxi company asks him like how they'll recognize him, and he'll say, "Oh, you'll know me. You know the film E.T." And it turns out it's E.T., and it turns out E.T.'s been on the Shankill.
Well, that actually comes from, I worked for about 5 years in Phonacab in Belfast. And
This was the source of a lot of stories you told as well.
yeah, I mean, I left there years ago, but I still entertain myself remembering some of the episodes. And once there was a guy that worked there, I don't want to say his name, but there were characters that worked there that he made me laugh, maybe without intentionally making me laugh. And he was quite serious about people ordering taxis, to the point where he was very aggressive. And my way of dealing with that was sometimes to say funny things to him. For example, he said, "Nobody take a booking at the Rex bar at the Shankill." Something along the lines of, "If you do, I will blowtorch your face." When he said to me, "Did you take a booking at the Rex bar in the Shankill Road?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Who was it? Who was it for? Because it better be somebody famous, because we have an account with the BBC. Was it somebody from the BBC?" And I said, "Well, actually, you might find this hard to believe, but you remember E.T.? It was E.T." So that's where the story comes.
Yeah, I mean, well, I was thinking about this because, even since I met you in whatever it was, 2011, 2012, you've paired or no, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the experimental performance you did in 2013. And there was kind of long sequences of storytelling and music, and these kind of gestures towards sculptural objects that you'd built and put into put into part of the stage set. And the more recent work, The Visitor, that I'm thinking of, the videos you sent over, they're really, really direct, and it's almost like pure voice or pure. It's interesting to hear you say the word character. I was wondering if there was even character for these ones.
I slip in and out. Of. There's probably a character to me. There's probably a character to me in places. In the videos that you've seen, no, it's just a monkey mask, and it's just me. It's just me, and me doing what I do, and me listening to my voice and feeling things. I have a rough idea of where I want to go, and I have some cue cards that I can see as I'm performing, sort of below the camera. And they're just in words that help me remember stories, and that's it.
And in these videos, there were lots of kind of mouth noises and stuff as well, which I don't remember from older work, but they seem really interesting because it's almost like, for a character, you normally think of a voice and that leads the character, but for the character to come out of like non-language, like, but the noises we can make with our mouth that aren't even words.
I like that. Yeah, I had a stage. I built a stage in my living room for a couple of years, and I was performing. So I think I loosened up a lot in terms of what you can do with a voice and a mic. And sometimes when the kids went to bed, I would perform, at low volume and experiment. And then if I had an afternoon free, I would play around. And I think, vocalizing and playing. But I think I'm only just dipping my toes into that, to be honest, Matt. Like there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of room to experiment with that and augment that. But I'm having fun and playing, I think, and I like it, and I want it to have a lightness. And once or twice I made like a monster noise or something, and I liked only doing it once or twice. And I'm quite interested in measuring passages of performance and thinking about attention and what is like a vignette, and when you should start and when you should finish, and sort of understanding when it's done. And that I'm interested in the craft side of it. And I do train or have trained people in communication skills and effective communication, not teaching English. Like I came to Italy and did some teaching English, but over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've focused a lot on effective communication and presentation skills and public speaking and stuff. And that's why I set up Diamond Dog it was actually to Sam, that we both know. Sam has their in G39. But that's what I help people with when they're giving presentations as artists or public speaking, is focus on the craft as well. Of course, focus on what you want to say, but think about how you're saying it too. And sometimes that's a great way of helping people get over nerves. Almost like think about it like music and timing and cadence and pausing and stuff like that. And sometimes when they focus on that, they become less self-conscious, you know, and they think about it more like a science of components. What I like doing is analyzing the performances after, redoing them, and trying to find a balance between moments of inspiration and play and improvisation, but also, you know, working with the basic components of any kind of delivered speech and what is the information you're giving and how much you should, you know, measure it out. Yeah, I would just say, well, my favorite things are like pausing and then saying something like, every now and again I put a snail on the heel of Bachelor. And to me, I like that because it's silly and it's playful, but it's just a nicely measured image through words. You know, and that excites me, the potential of that.
The thing that I thought was really interesting was that I kept coming across like bits, and I use that word in the sense that like a stand-up might use that word. Oh, I've got a bit, you know, I'm do this bit, and especially those kind of American stand-ups where they just kind of use material in different combinations over the years. And it made me think of like, you know, you've got these characters, you do have kind of some narrative drive to some of these characters, and what happens when the different characters are telling the stories? Is this a bit like how you were saying, just playing with the process or the craft of it, like trying to deliver it in a slightly different way? Or like, how does it feel to deliver it as different characters? You know, similar stories come through, like the crawling across the road and things like that.
Yeah, I like that you picked up. It's like going to the same cafe and having the same food but wearing different clothes. You know, it's a slightly different experience, but it's or going back, you know, like going back to Belfast and it was a cafe that I used to love going to go west on Castle Street and going back after not being in Belfast. It's the same cafe and I'm probably wearing the same clothes, but it's a slightly different experience. And it's just a different interpretation of a script. The script doesn't really change, you know. That thing about I fell out of my house onto the street, that script has never really changed. And I put it into a song.
I heard, it was in the song as well. That's why that when it really struck me, I was like, wait, it's kind of reworded and re-performed, but it's essentially the same material.
It's just a different interpretation of it. And I like that. John Walter used to say that to me. Remember John?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
He used to say that to me. You're always regurgitating, but it's not vomitous. You know, it's like you're doing something with it in a different way. You're taking the same motif.
Yeah.
And drawings and stories, but it's like you just, I don't know. I can't really give you what might sound like an intelligent explanation. It's just, I like doing it because maybe it goes way back to being a Catholic and going to Mass and reciting things. But I like it. It is like a prayer or a recital, but there's something about that going back to repeated verse or maybe learning things by heart. I think in Italian they call it the filastrocca. A lot of kids learn by heart a poem.
Yeah.
And they perform it at school, you know, it's sort of testing their memory, but it also has maybe a sweet message. I never thought about it. Like I don't like they're having a rule, like if you're doing that piece of writing, you have to wear that mask. I don't.
When you switch the costumes and change the character, why is that? What's the moment that you want to do it?
Don't know, dude. It's just you get up in the morning and why do you put on was it you that always wore the same jumper? You had the Aaron jumper.
I still wear the same clothes. Yeah. I still do it now.
Does it as well. I like this blue jumper. I wear it. I don't know, but then we have our favorite jumper. But then why one day do you get up and wear a pink jumper? I don't know. I don't really have a reason. It's just the case that I like playing and changing. I put on a blonde wig and some kind of disfigured mask. And then I go a lot at Halloween to these, you know, mask shops and cash in. I do buy a lot of masks, loads, and I have them in my bed in bags. And when I feel something bubbling in my gut and have time, I want to make a performance, I just pick whatever takes my fancy, you know.
You don't change for every performance, right? You've got, you know, these kind of, you do have these costumes or...
It just is what I feel like. I don't know. I can't really give you a reason, to be honest. What excites me, I would say if I analysed, it's probably every 6 months or a year.
Okay.
I just like the look of something. And then I started building another one. It's on a shelf to my right up there. And then I start making digital collages of it and photographing it and putting it into different environments and costumes. And then eventually words might come, or it might recite an older piece, or new words might come. And it's just a case of what excites me. I think it's a freedom also that maybe, just reflecting on it now, might come from not having strict deadlines. I just took a couple of very big steps back from the art world when I became a dad. And I think maybe the last sort of significant performance I did was when my son was maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3. And now he's 8. So it's been about 5 years, I think, since I did a live performance, although I've done a lot of work to camera. But I think I'll go back. I feel like I want to go back, but I don't necessarily want to have deadlines. I would rather have something to offer that was paid and give that. Deadline. I have enough deadlines with other stuff. It would make me nervous, and I don't want to be nervous about it.
I mean, I think it's very impressive that you make performance without an audience. That's almost like the way I get to inspiration is through that fear of having nothing on stage, and like knowing that something's coming up and therefore having to kind of write to that deadline. So that it's super interesting to hear it. You describe it more like a studio practice. And I do wonder, I've been formulating this theory. I don't know if basically I've been looking back at the history of performance in art.
Cool.
And my kind of lineage of it is from kind of, I guess it's like American 60s and 70s performance, right? So like Bruce Nauman and Vito Conci and stuff like that. And they're all
we'll go back before that. I mean, even in the 20s.
Oh, I know, but I just mean the kind of, I think where I'm drawing my wellspring.
Okay.
And they're all, I mean, not, that's just a very limited set of people, but lots of those people, and in Britain as well, a bit later in the late 70s and early 80s, lots of those people came from sculpture departments. And I wonder if there's a difference between people who start off as painters and become performance artists and people who start off as sculptors. I went to see the Anne Immerhoff. Do you know her? She's a German artist, and she started, she still makes paintings as well, but she makes these performances. And they're very much like about, combining and recombining movements and gestures and making images still. I mean, yours maybe aren't always about making images. They're about stories, but...
Yeah, it's a lovely theory. It's going to give me something to reflect on now every time I see performances or thinking about the background of the artist. I think image is less and less important to me. I mean, it's there in the costume.
And the collage is definitely...
Yeah, I'm still making images in that respect. But I think what ignites me, what makes me happy or excited much more is performing. And I was always doing it. I really loved, maybe once I left the degree course in Belfast, where I did a painting or finished in painting. I really loved talking about the work. I really enjoyed talking about the work. And it was only, I think when I did my MA, that I kind of had a breakthrough and just started making stuff up. Like people would ask me what the work was about. And I just abandoned theory. I just wasn't interested anymore in the theory. And I was a real theory head when I was at the undergraduate.
Oh, were you?
I just started making stuff up and saying, I remember telling somebody, they said, what is that painting? And it was like a silver lump on a wall. And I said, it's not a painting, it's a piece of a shark. I started talking rubbish. But it was the feeling that talking and inventing gave me. And I think it was more a case of just realizing that's what I wanted to do. And I think I always wanted to do that, because I can think back to being a kid and getting a kick out of having 3 or 4 people in front of me in the playground and telling them some story about a film that I saw the night before, but I'm just inventing it all, But I like it. Maybe I'm a psychopath. Maybe that's bad. I don't know. But then I like inventing on the spot and making people laugh, or just certainly giving people an experience. But more so these days, Matt, I think I would like people to laugh. I don't want people to be disturbed.
Okay, so this thing about character, or another word might be like a persona or something, or just a costume maybe. And this idea that sometimes I'm just myself but with a mask on or something. Like, I think that is super interesting, because for me, a lot of the work I am doing in performance, there is a character, but the character is too close to me. And I say too close in the sense that the audience are kind of sense that it's too close, and that brings a problem to mind, that, you know, which bit of it is character and which is not, and what's the intention behind all of this. And have you ever had conversations with people about that? Because, you know, some of your work is really troubling, and you said it deals with things like grief, and so those moments
transparent about it. I mean, if it's something, the grief, some of the stories around grief from when my father died were things that sounded like they could have happened in a house where a man was dying. Is probably, yes, that's true. The fantastical or grotesque didn't happen. I mean, it did not happen to me. But maybe the flavor of it, this is hard to explain. I would have to give a clear example. Okay, so in a story, I said, I dream of you on my hands and knees, vomiting beside my car. I dream of you looking up at the space between the tire and the mud flap. I dream of that stuff is just, I'm imagining it. And images come to me born of the trauma, born of the pain, but they're not something that happened to me. But I just let it do what it does. I let it does have a seed in lived experience, but I don't tend to create rules and say, you know, I can't write about what happened, what didn't happen. And I don't claim that it's based in, you know, I'm not writing an autobiography. What I found a bit sort of annoying interpretations of the work, and people certainly around I think I lived in Belfast in 2011 or 2012 or something. I think, because I know I moved to Italy in 2013 initially. But I think when I was there, people saw a lot of work and they were quite disturbed and found it difficult not to associate me with the person, which is a bit goofy, really. I mean, I think that if I were to take a Graham Greene novel off the shelf and the first line says I shot my wife or I drowned a child, I wouldn't call the police. So I think people's experience of fiction, when it's performed in the art world, the masked character, I think we need to grow up a little bit. You know, it's a bit silly. But I never played on it. It became a bit annoying if somebody came and sat beside you in a cafe and was like, "Oh, I don't know if I can have a coffee with you because you're weird." And I thought,
I suppose I'm not so. I understand that in the sense that people just assuming that everything you say is kind of literal. But I suppose that it's when it becomes this mixture of kind of free-flowing narrative, and like that when the story part of it kind of disappears and it's much more about, you know, vibe and mood and atmosphere and stuff. I guess, you know, and there's lovely moments when you're performing with your children in the room and stuff as well. So like this space of character and persona, like it's obviously become much more free for you over the past few years, which is really interesting to see.
Yeah, free is a good word. Thanks for saying that. I would like it to be free, but I think I'm tuning into what you're saying. So sometimes in some of those performances, even the videos that I've started just putting together that performance, The Visitor. So I'm sort of chopping it down into segments, but I think it'll be performed from start to finish. I'm just doing these performances to camera to kind of get a sense of what it would be. And I think in the summer, I'm going to do that in Belfast, going into people's houses, you know. People can book me and then my techie that I spoke to at the weekend, who's just Martin Carter, who's going to work with me, and he'll go in and sell flights and stuff. And then be ring at the door. Hopefully, this is the way it works. And they have to invite me in, or Martin is supposed to say, "There's a visitor." I'm ruining the surprise. And then I like the idea of going into someone's home, performing and leaving, and not having to do the thing of, you know, the clown should never be seen putting on his nose or her nose, their nose. And I really, it was a pain in the crack doing that in galleries where people were kind of going into toilets and you're putting on.
Oh yeah.
Face, and it drove me up the wall, and people thought I was being quite precious about it. But I think there's something powerful about somebody just turning up at your door, like, you know, a stranger, the visitor. Maybe it's something to do with childhood when we had visitors, you know. Kids have to go to bed when you've got visitors or something. But I like the idea that you go in, perform and leave, and that's it. And you're never there as kid. You're just the visitor. But the vibe, just to go back to what you're saying, I do feel that sometimes there's an anger that comes out. Something comes out in me. I don't know what it is. I feel it. I feel it come out, and I don't know what it is. Still working out what that is, but I feel it. It comes out in me sometimes, and but it doesn't get too hot. I keep it cold. I just don't know what it is, but I feel it, and I think that troubles people. Not, I don't think audiences have ever felt like I would become physically aggressive or anything. I think there's just a sense that the script has fallen away and there's a disturbed energy in the room. But to be honest, and totally frank, like, I don't know what that is. But it comes, and I think that's part of what gives anything its power. You know, whether it's a musical performance or writing. Maybe it has got nothing to do with my life. Maybe that's just what happens to me when I let go, making art or writing, or I don't know what that is, but I see it in other performers and I like it. I like it because it's very human. I really like it. I've seen performers let themselves go, and without it becoming indulgent, there's just something maybe dangerous or something else emerges. I like that a lot, actually.
I've been thinking about it a lot since, well, this is a slight tangent, but since becoming a dad and having more like polite conversations with people, other parents.
Polite?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, because you're
in
meeting
the
other
playground,
parents.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Just, baby groups and stuff. And knowing that inside everyone is basically a freak and a shameful weirdo. But obviously no one wanting to be the first person to like reveal that.
Yeah.
And there's something simply about, probably really about the act of making art and showing it to other people, even if it's a very nice painting, there's something odd about it, isn't there? But even though it's essentially human.
I just think it's like the word you used was freedom. I think it's a sense of freedom. And sometimes beautiful things come that are maybe make people feel happy. I don't know. And sometimes beautiful things come that are disturbing. But to me, they're just part of the human experience. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess there is what did you call it? A shameful weirdo freak inside everybody. I mean, it's the shameful weirdo freak, the SWF, to me is more to do with people shutting that space down. And that's, I stand and plant my flag. That's what art is. That's when it's at its best for me, is to maintain the sovereignty of that space. It's a space of freedom and expression. But, right-wing thinking, and we know what those oppressive forces are. I can't abide them. But I tend not to get angry about it now, but maybe I would have a polite conversation about that. But I love living here in Italy because it rarely happens. My father-in-law saw a lot of performances or me getting ready to do performance to cameras. Like, he'd pop over to the house and I'm, fully dressed in the costume and mask and stuff, and I'm just about to do a performance. And he looks at me and he just laughs. And they've seen, challenging imagery on the walls of some documentation of older performances. And they just ask me questions about it and are quite open-minded. And I don't find it's that space of shame. Like, it's different in Italy. They've had a different history and a different... even the average punter walking down the road has a really good understanding of Italian cinema and Fellini and Pasolini. It's different. I think they're just maybe more open. I don't know. It sounds like a balloon because but it's observable to me that when I go to Ireland, north or south or whatever on the island, I can feel that there's that kind of thing that you're talking about, but it doesn't really exist here in the same way. And I like that.
But then some of the characters draw so heavily on, well, I think the two big presences for me, and these are just obvious, but Belfast seems like it has a big presence in your work, which is obviously a place with a history of lots of stuff around, hidden behavior and making sure you're doing the right thing and not seem to be doing the wrong thing. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the Val Cohn and his South African accent. And I'm not going to, speak to South African history because I don't know loads and loads about it. But it seems to me there's
about it like that. Well,
I don't know, man. Like, it seems so clear. It's like a white South African.
The South African accent came to me because years ago I had to go to the hospital with an issue. And the doctor that came to look after me was South African. And he was like a junior student or so. I don't know what they're called. Like if you're finishing medical school or something. But he came and I was in a very bad mood because I was in a lot of pain. And he was speaking to me about what he needed to do to just quickly alleviate the pain. And he was very frank in a South African accent. And when he said it, I actually burst out laughing. He said, "This will effing hurt," because I was losing my mind because I was in so much pain. And I was just saying, "Give me painkillers, give me a flab, give me this, give me that." And he said, "It's not going to work. You need to have something manipulated back into place." And I was like, "Oh God." He said it's either that or go under the scalpel. And it was, let's say, a sensitive area. And I said, "Okay, just do it." And he said to me, "I'll be very frank with you. This will effing hurt," in a very strong South African accent. And it always stayed with me. I don't know the strange sort of factualness of it. It was hard and clipping, but there was a musicality to it, and I liked it. And it stuck in my mind. And then when I finally put on that mask of the guy, Falcone, or I think originally it was called Banjo String.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. And when I was playing around in front of a mirror in the Lawrence Street workshops in Belfast, wearing different outfits, and I settled on like this kind of Hessian sack and a bowler hat. I was trying out different voices, and they just were like "Hello, ladies and gentlemen," this sort of stuff. And then I said something like, "This will be good," and I said, "Oh God!" And I looked at myself, and I was like, I started saying, "What fell out of the house onto the street, crying with laughter," and this sort of stuff. And I was like, right, that's it. That's him. That's it. But you're the only person that says it's South African. Everybody says it's Birmingham. I don't think my South African accent is very good, but I did meet a guy from South Africa. What was his name? Murray. And he said, your brother says you're very funny at telling stories. So I told him a story about living in a cottage in Sligo and how I had to electrocute a mouse. It's a long story. But I threw the mouse into a plastic bag. The mouse was obviously in my house eating my food. And in the end, it's a lot. Anyway, I put the mouse into a plastic bag. And I was walking through the village. I'd been living on my own for 6 months. And I think sort of forgot about certain things you're not supposed to do in small villages, unless you want people to feel uncomfortable around you. So I was swinging this mouse in a white plastic bag, and it was bloodied and stuff. And then there was just one corner shop, and I threw it into the bin in the corner shop. But the man, I didn't look at the bin before I threw it in the bin, and it landed at the top of the bin. So the man in the shop could see that there was a bloody animal in a white plastic bag in the bin. Anyway, he said to me, "Have you been killing animals or something like that?" I said, "Yes." Anyway, I told Murray this story, but I think when I told him, I may have told it in a South African. And I said, how do you rate my South African accent? And he was like, "It's not bad. Like, it's obviously an Irish person trying very hard to do a South African accent, but you don't. It has comic value, so keep it up." He thought it was funny.
I do want to come back to this thing of Belfast, because there's just some amazing lines where I guess violence or something happens as a kind of, just this idea of violence being a punchline, or violence being like a...
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, well, that's Belfast humour. Yeah, I mean, I made these little drawings called Belfast music, and that's the music of Belfast. It's always very funny. I mean, I find it funny, but maybe other people don't. For example, one of the last times I was there, my friend Martin just jumped in the van. He saw me walking down the road, and I jumped in his white van, and we went off somewhere. And we pulled up at the lights, and this other guy, Brian, got in. Brian has played a clown in different performances for me, and he's brilliant. And we pulled up at the lights, and Brian said, "There's my cousin." I can't remember his name, Tomo or something. And I said, "Oh, that's nice. Do you want to say hello to Tomo?" And I was waving at Tomo. Tomo was sitting outside a pub drinking a pint of Guinness, and Tomo raised his pint and then mouthed, Brian said to Martin, "Will you pull up beside Tomo?" Martin pulled up, and Brian leaned out the window and shouted, "I hate you. I hope." I don't think people will find this funny, but I do find it funny. He said, "I hate you. I hope you don't."
What did Tomo say to that?
His face dropped. He was very upset. And the car drove away. And it's very Belfast humour, and I don't know if people get it. Sometimes when I first came to Italy, I would share stories like that with Italians. They were horrified. They found it really, upsetting. But to me, there's something essentially Belfast about it. It's just funny. Maybe other people don't find it funny. I do find it very funny. And I tell a story like, walk, tomorrow I will walk to the burnt out house
Mm.
up a small hill filled with rocks in a blazing summer light because I want to get beaten to death.
That's exactly the line. Yeah, that's exactly the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
But I think maybe also it comes from working in the taxi place. People used to say things like casual statements of uh, like almost comic book esque violence. I will blow torch your face off. The
Mm.
guy said to me. Actually, the guy said to me, like the taxi was 5 minutes late, and he said, I'm going to come to the depot, cut your face off, set you on fire, and throw you out the window. And I said to him, but are you not in a rush? Are you not in a rush?
In that sense, it's, just to kind of push on this a bit, do you find the same kind of inspiration in Italy if you find Italy a much more open and relaxed
It's a really
place?
good question. I like that question. I find it very free, but the Belfast music is still in me. Like it still makes me laugh. Um, what makes me laugh in Italy? Italians. It took me ages to get to know the different sort of kinds. I don't like saying this because everybody's everybody. But now I recognize characters when they're on sort of sketch shows on TV. There's a playfulness, there's an inventiveness, it's just observable. It's observable on the street, a tenderness, an aggression, a goofiness. Every moment is the opportunity to make it into something special. And I love that. I love it.
Mm.
That's why I fell in love with Ale, my wife. It's very different. I never knew that I needed that or wanted that, or as much as I love people saying, I hate you, I hope you die at the traffic lights. I think I needed something else, but it does make me laugh. But Rome is different, and Rome is very unique within Italy, and different areas of Rome are unique, and where we live is unique. And it took me time to get used to it. What inspires me here? Maybe Ale would be more inspired by what she sees. She
Mm.
makes drawings of people and things she sees, characters, and sometimes she tries to take a sneaky photo of someone walking down the street, and she gets inspired by them. I get more inspired by the feeling, and the feeling is freedom. Like I can go and do a performance under the balcony at the underpass or the flyover, and just be me, and people sort of look at you and smile, or look at you and laugh. And I think the last one I did in Belfast on the street, somebody said, you're Jimmy Savile's brother. Somebody came up close to me and whispered into my ear, like, you're Jimmy Savile's brother. And I just thought it's time to wrap up.
So have you been doing performances in public space in Rome then?
Yeah, sometimes I just go out and do it. I haven't done it now for a while, but I do it. And I find it, I like it. Sometimes they're documented, sometimes they're not.
Mm.
I'll do more of them. I just like it. Being here makes me feel free. Not every day, not paradise, but I feel in me, I can be me, and I feel very happy here.
Mm.
Things you saw, like maybe at the start of that video of I can't remember, taxis, it might be called, the one with the ET on the shackle, where he's sort of doing stuff with his hair and going.
Oh yeah,
that's very much, I think, coming from sort of relaxing, playing with my kids, and things people do when they have after meals, like you do a turn after a meal, and people sort of play around in that way, just in social situations here in this neighborhood in Rome, being quite specific. If they do it in Milan, I don't know, to be honest, or down south of Italy, but they do it here. I think one of the first Halloweens I was here, I went over to my in-laws' house, and the mom was just dressed up as a clown, like the Carnivale thing was.
No way.
I was quite taken aback, because she had full white face and the red nose, and was giggling and laughing, and I just thought, God, I so belong here. You know what I mean? I really like this. The kids get dressed up for Carnivale. I just love it. There's a freedom to it. It's very free.
You just have to convince Ale's mum to shout, I hate you, I hope you die at people when they come in the house.
The first time I got a paid sort of contract job, it was a full-time contract. I think it was the first time in my life I had a full-time contract. It's going back maybe 8 years or something. I can't remember exactly, but I was doing teaching English in office, sort of going to somebody's office. And I told a pretty hardcore joke. I thought it was funny, you know. I still had my Belfast humor, but he was so horrified. And then when I was on the way out, the boss called me and said, "Oh, you know, can you come back to the office?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I just lost my job on the first day for telling this joke." And I got back to the office and he called me into his office. My heart was, I was sweating. And I thought, oh, Jesus, this is the first day, the first student. I've blown it. And he said, oh, the student got back. He had some nice feedback for you. No, he has some feedback for you. Do you want to hear it? And I was like, oh. And he said, Cian is the nicest, sweetest teacher. So I was like, oh my God. And I said, is that it? And he said, why? Is there something else? I'm like, no, just that it. And he went, yeah, good luck. Well done. I'm happy. And on the way out, I said to myself, I will never, ever tell one of those jokes again like that to an Italian ever. When I was back in Belfast at the weekend, there was a man that gave it that this is, I don't know if this is, I'll tell it anyway, but slightly related. The man walked into the pub. I was at the Empire. He came down the steps and he was walking into the pub. And I really liked his cravat. He was an older guy, he was about 70, and I really liked his cravat. Now, years ago, I wouldn't have stood up and said, oh, wow, I really like your cravat. I don't think that was quite where my head was at years ago when I lived full time in Belfast. But I stood up and I said, hey, I really like your cravat. Oh my God, you've got such a lovely sense of dress. Would you like to chill and have a pint? And he was like, sure. I said, where did you get your cravat, by the way? Because I want to get one because it's amazing. And he said, I just bought it over there in a charity shop for £2. And I said, right, that's it. I'm going there tomorrow. Blah, blah, blah. We had a nice chat. Anyway, he said to me, where do you live? Usually when people in Belfast say, where do you live? Maybe they think I'm from Dublin. And people from Dublin think I'm from Belfast. But I said, I live in Rome, in Italy. And he thought for a moment and he looked up to his right. And then he said to me, parlez-vous Italian? I was so happy because it was such a funny joke. But to me, it was funny. I gave him a hug. And I said, you're a very funny man.
I feel like we should mention your diamond dog, because you mentioned it briefly, but we should talk about it a little bit because I think it's super interesting. Well, just basically, what is it?
What is it? Well, essentially, it's a training and coaching company for artists. Essentially artists. Although anybody can be trained in those skills, but I think the kind of training that I would like to offer and have offered seems to benefit artists quite well. Sometimes in relation to, like, a lovely quote that you came up with, you shared on Twitter a while ago, was Lydia Barlow's sculpture is a language that stands up against the world. Is that correct?
That's a great quote.
And that, to me, is related to people speaking, because I often consider people speaking, presentations, artist talks, performances as sculptures, insofar as there's a way of understanding the structure and what kind of information you're giving has a weight and a form. And artists, I think, respond well to visualizing something. So you can visualize a talk before you give it. It might help you rather than just structuring it in a more traditional way. And also there's lots of other exercises that we can do. You can listen to a guitar solo as a way of understanding, sort of growing in confidence. There's lots of things that I've built up. That particular course, I think, will probably be live before the end of 2022. And I want to call it the House of Heavy Magic. And I use that term heavy magic because maybe I should have said that at the start. But part of what I feel when I'm performing or when I see a good performance is heavy magic. And that comes from a little interview clip I saw on Instagram of the bassist Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers talking on the Howard Stern show about Nirvana and touring with them in the 90s. And he said Nirvana carried a heavy magic to be respected. And it just stuck in my mind as something that I experience when I hear or when I see a very, very good performance, or somebody, whether it's an artist or a person, a human, just talking very honestly. I think there's a connection, and that to me is heavy magic. It says on the website, it's public speaking, coaching and public speaking for artists, but then there's a sort of, I can't remember the term that I've used, point of order. I'm not really that interested in coaching. I'm not really that interested in training or coaching public speaking. I'm interested in training and coaching heavy magic and helping people to sort of get in touch with that and manage the energy. And it's essentially the energy that you feel from the audience and the energy that you feel in yourself, and managing that in a way that you're happy with, rather than being a bag of nerves. Or ain't nothing wrong with being a bag of nerves, but if that's not what you want and you want something else, then that's what I usually work with. But there's also the science of components and that of any kind of performed speech or performed voice or people speaking. And that comes from years of just working with training people in effective communication in business. And it's a lot more bish bash bosh, which I kind of like. They tend to take instructions differently, and time is very, very important. You know, you've got 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40, whatever. You kind of need to get somewhere. I never thought I would get into that, but I never thought I would be doing that. But I found myself, because I, worked in performance and still doing work for years, considering the voice and lots of things in relation to pace, pause, emphasis, delivery, writing, all that. I found that those skills were easily transferable to helping people give presentations, especially people that were nervous and very self-conscious or just terrified of speaking in front of people. I found that I had a knack getting them to where they wanted to be quite quickly. So lovely Sam from G39, Samuel Hasler, who's a brilliant writer as well and performer, came over to do the British School at Rome Fellowship, and we went up to Revivia. He wanted to go. He asked me, say hello and go out for a coffee a couple of years ago when he was doing his fellowship. And instead of going to Piazza Navona or wherever, I took him to Revivia, where there's a prison, because I liked that area of the city, and I thought it would be nice for him to have a coffee in prison and whatnot. And he enjoyed it anyway. We got talking, and I told him about what I was doing for my day job. And then he put two and two together. So Diamond Dog Coaching, .com is really wouldn't exist without, the brilliance of that guy's mind, Sam's mind. And he was able to put the two and two together, not me. If it's a good idea, it's his idea. Would you do some work with G39? Consequently, you've done loads of workshops and individual coaching. And it's always around similar kind of issues of confidence, managing nerves, and it's a chronic issue, it seems to be, because a lot of people say that they avoid artist talks or public speaking opportunities because they get so nervy.
It's one of the biggest things with students that I teach, actually, is their fear of them speaking about their work, even to small groups of, people that they've, been studying with. They often phrase it in a way that is like, I can't do that, or, that's just something I can't do, as though they aren't already doing it when they speak with their friends.
Because I do think it's a part of the professional practice that's missing, And I think back to when I did my artist talk at the end of third year, I was so angry, and maybe that's where my head was at the time, but I couldn't wait to get to the end. And I remember looking up, I have a distinct memory of looking up. I was sitting on the ground for some reason under some paintings, and I was reading a poem. I don't think I even talked about the paintings. I was reading some poem that meant something to me. And I looked up, and David Letcham, who was a lovely tutor at the art school in Belfast at the time, looked at me sort of with a heartbreaking tenderness, like, dude, chill, like, fuck, you're so wound up.
Yeah.
I remember looking, that's what I read from his face, and that just made me even more volcanic. There were so many things I wanted to say that...
It's weird. It's part of professional practice. And then it's also funny. I mean, these days in higher education, in art, there's lots of things about employability and transferable skills and all of this kind of thing. And in a way, art, you kind of want to keep it as a protected space where none of it has to be transferable. But it's so interesting that, like all of these skills can be developed through making art.
Well, I think it can be many things. I mean, I spoke to a lot of business people about that, the transferability of skills that artists have into the business world. And I'm very open-minded about that. And I've discovered a lot and confronted a lot of my own biases and prejudices about that, because before I went into teach, I certainly didn't have the same idea about the business world as I do now. I'm just open to, it's just a human thing, and skills are skills. And I don't necessarily see them as being, when you say we need to protect the art, I think the art world is fine, and skills can move into another field and it doesn't diminish anything. I wouldn't be so precious about it. They're skills that can help humans to communicate the way they want to.
Thank you so much to Cian for speaking to me back in at the end of 2022, and thanks for being patient as I failed to release the podcast for so long. Thanks to you all for listening, and I will be with you very soon with Emma Bennett. Bye.